This is Ash Relesser of the bands Relesser and Autumn's Descent, and you're listening to Rock for Him.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Rock for Him podcast. I'm Jeremy, your host, and with me is my good buddy Jason Sanchez-Bukowski. How's it going, Jay?
I'm doing all right. Tired, but I'm here.
And the newest member of our crew, Mr. James Robert from the band Keeper of the Flame. How's it going, man?
Good, man. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, we're excited. Well, our guest for tonight is a returning guest. We've got Mr. Ash Relesser of not only Relesser, but also Autumn's Descent. How's it going, Ash?
It's going. Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you back. So
we got. You remember the band Viridia?
Yep.
You heard of them?
Oh,
So
yeah.
the lead singer of Viridia used to be in another band before that, and that band opened for us on the road a couple of times. So, man, what you want to talk about? A great voice. Yeah. So, well, we played. There was a band called Since October.
Heard of them.
Remember them? Nine Lashes. We did a bunch of shows with. Actually, Nine Lashes. The end of Autumn's Descent was where Nine Lashes was getting started. What's his name? Guy from Korn, Brian Head Welch. Before he called it Love and Death, he was going under his solo name.
Yep.
We did a few shows with him, and Spoken and Disciple, and so Autumn's Descent was. Around 2010, 2011, we were back up hanging with those people and doing shows there. And the self-titled record was doing okay. But we got to a point where it hit a wall. In 2010, I turned 35. And my wife and I had a baby. So it was, she had the baby, I was supporting, But I'd made a deal with her when we got married. I was 26 years old, and I said, look, I'm going to try to pursue music very, very seriously. And if I get to the point where I'm 35 and we're not able to make a living off of it, I'm going to transform it to a hobby. And we got to that point, and I remember she was 30 years old. She came up to me and she said, I turned 30 this year. I want a baby. I said, wait, what? She said, I want a baby. I said, we decided before we got married that neither of us wanted kids. Because deep down, I knew that if I had a kid, I'd have to grow up. I couldn't be the kid myself anymore. And I didn't want to. I'm a Toys R Us kid. I don't want to grow up.
I don't want to grow up.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, good news. The 25 new Toys R Us stores are opening in North America again, or in the United States again, starting over the next year. They're coming back.
Slowly.
So, yeah, I just read that article last week. So anyway, I'm guys, you're not asking me any questions. I'm just talking. If you want me to keep,
Oh no,
I can ramble like this the whole time. If you want me,
I was just messaging Jeremy, and I was like, dude, I can listen to Ash all night long. Like,
seriously,
yeah,
man.
telling stories.
Such a great.
I mean, honestly,
No, thank you.
This is, and just for me to interrupt, just real quick, listening to you, how you were saying, your first few CDs, you're like, ugh. They weren't what I wanted. They weren't my vision. And then listening to your music now, I think I can speak for everyone here, at least on the show. You have perfected your craft. Like, your music is amazing. I listen to it, and it takes me back to those days that you said you wanted, like, 9 Inch Nails and Typo Negative. Like, it takes me back because that's what I listen to. I mean,
Thank you.
I had every Halo from 9 Inch Nails that there was, like, every single one of them. Like, I seen Typo Negative probably 30 times every time they came into Michigan. So listening to your music, to almost anyone on your label, it's like it takes me back to those days where I'm just like, this is the music that I love, but
it glorifies Christ.
It glorifies Christ.
Yeah.
That's what we wanted. Yes, thank you.
So you are hitting everything.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, that's what I was shooting for. I was I'll tough to tell you the typo story because I didn't really become a typo negative fan until I couldn't see them anymore.
Mm.
So they always opened. I saw Queensryche on tour for the Promised Land album in 94, 95, 96.
Mhm.
I must have seen that show 4 or 5 times. They were always the opening band, and I always thought they were mismatched. I
Yeah.
went and saw King's X on the Dogman tour.
Yeah.
They were sandwiched between Typo Negative and Motley Crue, and it was Motley Crue with John Corabi.
Oh. Oh.
that was I tell you what, I know Motley Crue's always been Vince as the singer, but John Corabi singing Shout at the Devil, I'm like, nope, goodbye, Vince.
Did you, speaking of Motley Crue, did you hear that who is it, Mick Mars has recruited John Corabi and they're thinking of doing their own version of Motley Crue?
I would love for him to call it something other than Motley Crue, but I will definitely check it out. But no, that would be killer. But my wife came to me when she was 30 and she said, I want a baby. And I said, we agreed before we got married that we didn't want kids. And she said, I know, but I'm 30 and my clock is ticking and I have this overwhelming desire to be mommy. And I panicked. And I said to her, my dear Stephanie, we've been married for 7 years. We've never gone on our honeymoon. I'll give you a baby after we go on our honeymoon. And I figured that would buy me some time. No, the next day the plane tickets were bought, the cruise tickets were bought. We had a full itinerary. And in January 2009, we went on a cruise to the Bahamas and had our honeymoon. And that is the one in 21 years of marriage. That is the only vacation the two of us have ever had, just the two of us. We've always gone with her parents, my parents, friends, or whatever. So that was the only vacation we ever had, just the two of us, and we loved it. We were pregnant 6 months later. And my son will be 14 in February. My daughter just turned 10 last week. So didn't just do it once, we did it twice. We had not just one kid, we have two. I was like, oh boy, okay. But once my son was born, I had the guitar player in my band at the time really razzed me. He's like, oh, you got to hang it up. You have to become dad. And I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking. That was my fear.
Yeah.
And he was just egging it on. He was just razzing me, but I don't think he knew at the time how much he was really feeding into that fear that I'm a has-been. I never really made it, never got big. I have to grow up and be responsible now. And so I really wrestled with that, and I sank into a deep depression. On the day that my son was born, my wife had labored for 12 hours. We ended up in the C-section room in the OR, and I'm there, and they cut him out of my wife. As soon as they pull him out, he's screaming. They take him over to the sink and they wash him off, and they wrap him up. They bring him over to me and they hand him to me, and he's screaming. And I looked down at him. I said, William. And he stopped screaming and his eyes got wide. He recognized my voice. I used to talk to him in utero, but he recognized my voice. And I held up my pinky finger like this, and he reached up and he grabbed it. And instead of crying, he started cooing like that. And that was like a light switch flipped in my heart like that suddenly. And I looked down at this little baby and I said, it's not about me anymore.
Right.
It's about you.
Yep.
And I'm okay with that. I'm going to work hard to make a great life for you as best as I can. And God taught me a lesson that day that I'll never forget. It was a turning point in my life. Taught me how to, and to this day, I've learned what it is way more so to be selfless and sacrifice on behalf of my family and my kids. And I mean, every father knows that, right? Every mother knows that. So, but yeah, God taught me selflessness. I asked God for patience. He gave me a son. I asked God for wisdom, and he gave me a daughter. And after that, I stopped asking God for things because then glad you guys are laughing.
Oh man, I needed that. I got to tell you, Ash, I was one of those guys that I never wanted to get married, never wanted to have kids. Like even my wife, before we got married, we kind of worked together, and I told her, "Don't pursue me. I have no interest in getting married." She was on the other side of the state. We met once, and it was like lightning bolt. I was
Yep.
like, I'm gonna marry that woman.
Yeah. We're not, I said I wouldn't get married. Let's go get married.
Yep. And here I am, married, and my daughter just turned 15 a few months ago. So it's like God works in weird ways. You tell
He
God, I
does.
don't want to do that, and He's like, okay, here's what you're really gonna do now.
It's not your plan, it's mine. And my kids are the great. I mean, I have the greatest fear I've ever had in my life because of my kids, fear for them.
Yep.
At the same time, they're my greatest joy. I
Yep.
just, and I learned so much about myself in the process of trying to raise them. It's wonderful to be a parent. But after my kids were born, my time for music became less and less. And so I had to decide, if I'm going to do this, I want to do it at a really pro level, even if it takes me a long time to do it. So the number of albums and things like that started dwindling down, number of frequency of recordings and shows, but the quality started going up. And I said, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to make sure if I release it, it's what I want. I'm not going to release something halfway. So Relesser came out in 2012. I mean, I did a remix for a Cell Dweller song in 2006, and I used the name Relesser because I wanted to sneak it in and see if I could fool Clayton. And it worked. It did. It totally worked. Because I wondered if he would see my name and say "fanboy." I'm not even listening to it. Versus if I stuck a name he didn't recognize in there. And so I did. I did "Own Little World," which is the very first or second song he did as a remix opportunity. And I did it under the name Relesser, and he chose it and put it on his sampler. And I was like, "Oh, yay! I did it!" And then I told the president of Fixed Records that it was me, and he was like, "Oh man, really?" I've known James since he was 17. He and I met the day that he met Clayton. I was up in the recording studio when he met Clayton, and there were 16 of us that got invited, and it was really cool. But to watch James, watch his progression from 17-year-old high school student to 20 years later, he's the president of Fixed Records and has been leading it successfully. It's like, dude, wow. Yeah, so cool I mean, he and I were closer back 15 years ago, but we're still good acquaintances today, and I can text him and he'll respond. And yeah, great guy. Love him and his family. But no, Relesser formed in 2012, and then we worked really hard for 4 years, paying dues and playing shows and refining our craft and getting the production right. And I was from 2011 to 2016. I was very, very intensive in the studio and upping my recording game. If I couldn't pay for somebody like Grant, I wanted to be able to do it like Grant. So I started studying everything I could get my hands on and calling in, hey, how do you do this? What's your trick for this? Okay, if you're going to do an EQ scoop, what are you going to do? And I learned so much just in the 3 songs I did with Grant, but then I started working with a few other people and started learning things. And today, I'm still not where I want to be, to be honest with you. It's not as loud as I want it to be, the RMS level, or the LUFS, whatever gauge you want to use. But I want it to be fat, I want it to be full, and I want it to be loud. And I want to have tones that scream professional, and I want to have it done right. So when I started doing the Relesser debut record, we started working on it in 2013. It didn't come out till 2016, and it was actually recorded twice. So we recorded it with our guitars tuned to drop C, and then we had a lineup change. We changed out bass players in 2015, and the new bass player came in, and he said, "You got to go heavier. You got to go heavier." And we didn't want to rewrite the song, so we just dropped them down to A. We just dropped all the guitars to drop A. And I had to buy new guitars to go into that scale and everything. But we dropped it down to drop A, and all of a sudden things are heavier. It's easier for me to sing. So although I was not used to singing in that key, so I had to adjust a little bit, but we did it, and we released the album. And one of the songs off of it, a song called Awakening, actually hit a Spotify influencer list and took off. And we had 2 songs go to radio that really didn't do too bad. They did pretty darn good. And so we toured off and on just regionally for that album for about 3 years. And then we released another album in 2019 called Identity. And we were just getting ramped up to support that when the pandemic hit. And so we didn't really get to support it like we wanted to. During the pandemic, we lost the bass player and had to, or right before the pandemic, rather, we lost the bass player and had to replace him. And during the pandemic, Andy, the guy that had been guitar player for Relesser, also played in Grave Robber. He was the guitar player in Grave Robber. Has been for years. He joined Relesser first and then was in Relesser maybe for about 3 years and then got the gig in Grave Robber and played in 2 bands. And he used to live in Muncie, Indiana, which wasn't far from me. But then he moved about 4 years ago. He moved from Muncie down to almost Evansville, Indiana area. That's a 3-hour drive away. And so I said, he said at the time it wasn't going to interfere. But during the pandemic, my day job took off like a rocket. What I do a lot of online facilitation and training and things like that, leadership training, sales training. And the demand for what I do went through the roof. And I was working 80 hours a week. So Relesser just kind of sat on the shelf during the pandemic, didn't do hardly anything. When the pandemic was winding down in 2021, Relesser got back together, and I'm sitting in I moved out of Indianapolis. I moved up to a small town halfway between Indianapolis and Fort Wayne and bought 5 acres out in the country and got doubled the recording studio size and stuff like that. So I remember I've got a thread going on social media, this private thread with the guys in Relesser. And I said, are we ready to come out of hiatus here and start playing some shows and do a new record? And Andy quietly said, I got to resign. He said, with the cost of living, the cost of gas, being in Grave Robber didn't really slow down a whole lot during the pandemic. They kept playing shows and doing things. And he said, look, if I have to choose just one band to be a part of, I got to choose Grave Robber because it's active. It's very active. And that's what I like. I said, all right, doors open if you ever want to come back. And I still say that today. It's still open. More than half the songs on the first 2 records were either written or co-written by Andy. Phenomenal guitar player, phenomenal guy, love him to death. So then I sat down with Chris, the drummer, and Jacob, the bass player, and I thought sure they were going to throw the towel in without Andy because we had such great chemistry. But to my surprise, both of them said, let's do another record. I said, wait, what? I said, yeah. And I talked Chris Chris wanted to quit 2 or 3 times between our first and second record because of some stress going on in his work life and his family life and things like that. So I thought with Andy leaving and Jacob being our third bassist in the band, this was gonna shut the door. And both Chris and Jacob said, let's do another record. I said, what? I said, we didn't really support the last record. Should you want to go out and get another? Do we want to get another guitar player and go play in support of Identity? And they said, no, too much time has passed since that came out. And we need to do a new record. And we need to do it with a new guitar player. I said, wow, that's a lot. That's a lot to do. Meanwhile, I'm still working 60 hours a week, not 80. So I prayed about it and we put an ad out, and the ad wasn't out 12 hours. And we had 4 or 5 people respond. And one of them was a kid named Jaron. Jaron had been a student of mine. I teach part-time at a university in Indianapolis and have since 2018. Jaron had been a student of mine years ago. And he said, this guitar spot that's open, is it for Relesser? And I said, yeah, it is. He said, where do I audition? And I thought, this kid's too young. Because everybody in Relesser was, 30s, 40s. This kid's in his 20s. And I said, all right, we'll give you a shot. So he came in and he nailed it. I mean, we said, let's do this song. He's like, all right, let's go. He knew our catalog. He knew most of it really well. Quick study. And he brought a fire. He brought an enthusiasm to the group that had been lacking for a long time. He was hungry and green. He hadn't played a bunch of shows and done all the things that we had done. So he was like, I want to experience this for the first time, and let's do it. And we're reliving the fire and ourselves through him. We're like, okay, let's do this. Let's do this. We started writing songs. And so we would put songs together, and he would hear a guitar solo or hear something come together or a vocal harmony in the studio, and he would just go, whoa, like that. I mean, it's old stuff for somebody like me, but he's like freaking out. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is what it feels like. I take it for granted. And so what we ended up recording, putting together, was Relesser's newest record, which is called Utopia Dystopia. And Jacob, our bass player, wrote or co-wrote probably about 30%, 40% of the album, and came up with the title. So yeah, Devil in Disguise is his. Till the End of Days is his. The Run, I wrote the music on Run, and he had the vocals and the lyrics waiting to go for it when the music was done. It was just stuff like that. Just came together. Time was the first real song that I collaborated with Jaron on. Jaron, the new guitar player. So yeah, I mean, just in case you're wondering what albums are out and what can you check out, I'm going to recommend Autumn's Descent's Rescinding Dead Letters album, which is that came out in 2020, and it's a re-recording of that album that I couldn't stand the production on from 2003. Okay. Re-recording of that. And I've recorded it from scratch. It took me 17 years to do, but I got it. And I was pleased. When I released it, I was very pleased with the production, and it's in digital distribution. We'd released several singles off of it and a couple of lyric videos. And I listened to part of it for the first time in over a year last week. And I went, oh, I'd have done that. If I had to do that today, I would have done that differently. But okay, and that's not bad. That actually sounds better than I remembered it. I'd do that one differently if I could, that just stuff like that. But it was neat to, that album's out. That I prefer that one. The EP that I did in 2005 with Grant Moorman called Primer, that is still out.
Yeah.
Character Assassination is currently out in digital distribution, even though it flopped. The production on it's not as great. I intend at some point, I don't know when, but it's on my bucket list to go back and redo that album like I did Rescinding Dead Letters. Redo it so I'm happy with it. Give it a fair shot. But that's in its current form, it's still out. All other Autumn's Descent music has been pulled from distribution on purpose. Just limited runs, and I decided, you know what, that's fine. I put a few singles out here and there. There's a song I put out in 2018 called Brother. Autumn's Descent actually went on hiatus. We disbanded, and I put the project on the shelf at the end of 2011. And then in 2018, I pulled it back out at the request of Asylum Ministries. Are you guys familiar with them at all?
No.
And I know Jason had to take off, didn't he? Yeah. So we need to probably wrap this up pretty soon.
You can keep going. I mean, James and I, we can ask questions or whatever.
So I got a message from Ben Rao, who was head of Asylum Ministries. Now, the Asylum Ministries, if you ever went to Cornerstone, did you guys ever go to Cornerstone?
I was not able to ever go.
Okay, you've heard stories about it, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, more than once.
I went for the first time in 1994. Probably went a dozen times over the years, from the 94 to the time it ended. And the Asylum Ministry group was a group of people that are goth and industrial. They would go out to Cornerstone Festival and set up this giant circus tent, but it was all deep black and red, like maroon. And they put cobwebs and stuff all over it. And you walk inside and there are menorahs burning, and it just gravestones and stuff like it. It looked like you were walking into a grave robber concert, and there would be all of these people dressed up like the Crow, lining the walls. It's where all the goth industrial people got out of the sun. And they would have raves and stuff like that. The band Leper is from that, that stuff. So I got to know a couple of the people in that tent during Cornerstone. And when Cornerstone ended, that tent migrated out to Audio Feed Festival in Champaign, Illinois. So in 2013, Audio Feed holds its first ever festival, and they were trying to book acts. And the guys in the Asylum Ministry group reached out and said, we want to book Autumn's Descent. And I said, Autumn's Descent doesn't exist anymore, but Relesser does. So they booked Relesser. So Relesser went out and played under Asylum Ministries banner as part of the very first Audio Feed Festival. And then we kept coming back year after year. I think in the 10 years that they've done Audio Feed now, I think we've missed one or two that we weren't a part of. But in 2018, Asylum Ministries reached back out and they said, we want to book Autumn's Descent. And I said, Autumn's Descent doesn't exist anymore. Here's Relesser. Relesser's available. And they said, we want to book Relesser and Autumn's Descent. And I said, does anybody even remember Autumn's Descent? It's been 6 years since Autumn's Descent played it, 7 years since we played a show. I don't think anybody even remember. We were popular. I mean, our heyday was 15 years ago. I don't think anybody remembers or cares. And Ben Rao said, well, too bad, I'm booking Autumn's Descent. We got a spot for you on this. It's deja vu. And it wasn't him in New York. It was, but he says, you gotta do this. So I put out a call and had some friends answer. And I had the bass player, one of the guys that played bass in Grave Robber, Gene Fiesel from the band Fiesel, and he was also in the band Liptical, if you ever remember that band years ago. He came and played bass for me. I had Jake, the guy that plays bass in Relesser, come play guitar. And I had another drummer fill in. And in 2018, we pulled Autumn's Descent out of the mothballs and went and played in front of Audio Feed. And what shocked me is that there were about 150 people in this little tent to come see us. And I looked out, and as we're starting the show, we launched into the first song, and more than half the people out there are singing along. And I was like, where were all of you a decade ago? You know,
right.
But it just blew me away that, okay, there were some fans out there. And what was really funny is, not funny, haha, but just odd to me, is that I'm looking out, none of these people are kids. These are all people that are my age or about 10 years younger, that maybe they were kids when I was playing out a decade ago. Maybe they were in high school. Now they're 10 years older, and they came out and they saw us. And I went, no freaking way. So I put a single out called Brother, which is actually about my heroes growing up in the 90s. We used to call them the New York Posse. That was Clayton and all the people who were in Argyle Park. Okay. So that include Clank and so even the people that were from the West Coast. So you'd have Mark Solomon from Stavesacre, you'd have Gyro from Mortal. They were considered the New York Posse, even though they were from California. Jeff Ballou, the same thing, guy from Crucified and Stavesacre, Orange County, but consider him New York Posse. And so the song Brother is about the torment of the Argyle Park album is about going to a church and then being abused in that church, which is what happened to a lot of the guys in the band Argyle Park. And so that's how they processed it, is you're not representing Christ, leave me alone, that kind of thing. That was the way they dealt with it. So that whole album, Argyle Park, Misguided, is about their abuse at the hands of church people. And so my song Brother, under the name Autumn's Descent, is a response to that. It says, I won't be another tragedy. Help my brother up and carry him this time. I won't let him be a slave to misery. Just lifting them up, kind of thing. It's almost like a prayer, or given the opportunity. Those guys were always 5 years older than I was. Born too late. If I'd been 5 years older, I would have been part of that team. Instead, I was the little guy that seemed, when you were a kid and you were playing with your friends and you had your younger brother or sister and mom or dad say, take them with you. And so they were the tag along. I was the tag along for that generation of music. I was too young for that group, but I'm too old for for the grunge stuff that happened right after it. So I was right smack in the middle, and I never really fit anywhere. So I just created my own scene. Yeah, that was the return of Autumn's Descent, and that inspired me to say, hey, let me write a new record, or let me finally release Rescinding Dead Letters. And right now, Autumn's Descent is going to put out a new song, hopefully before the end of the year. It was supposed to come out next week. It's not done. It's and nobody knows this yet. I've not announced it, so I'll announce it on your podcast. It's a cover song. In 1990, there was a band called Information Society. If you guys know that name at all, they had 4 or 5 hits right around that time period. One of them was a song called Think. And I loved that song. I've always loved that song. I've done versions or covers live of that song for years. I've never done a recording of it and released it. I did a recording demo that was horrible in 1999, but what I did is I took their song and I slowed it down and said, what would it sound like if Typo Negative did it? Meet Stabbing Westward, of course. So yeah. So that it's got a very different feel. Same melody, mostly same lyrics, but it's going to come out here hopefully before the end of spooky season, because it sounds like it belongs in a spooky season. So, but I'm hoping to get that out here in the next few weeks. And I don't know, because it's a cover song of radio, we'll play it or not, but we'll find out.
Send it to us. We'll play it.
Yep, it's a fun song.
If you like what you saw today, hit the subscribe and like button down below, and don't forget to share it to all your friends. Also, leave us a comment down below. If you're gonna rock, rock for him.